Thank you, and welcome to the session of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. Are there any apologies or substitutes on agenda item 1?
I haven't received any apologies or substitutes.
And do we have any councillors or commissioners attending online?
We don't appear to have any online today.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes of the meeting, which was the 5th of December last year? No comments. So if everyone's happy, can we agree them please by a vote? Yes. So the minutes are accepted. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody have an interest to declare?
Yeah, Adrian Hafferty. I've been heavily involved with the inputs and feedback during the development of the climate strategy, and as per our overview and scrutiny rules, no member may be involved in scrutinising a decision in which he or she has been directly involved. As such, I'll exclude myself from participating in item 7 of the agenda with the leader and cabinet member for climate change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, likewise.
Okay, all right, thank you. Is anybody working under the party whip? No. Agenda item 4, urgent items of business. Are there any?
There are no urgent items of business.
And agenda item 5, have we had any requests under the public participation scheme?
I'm not aware of any public participation requests as we haven't received any under the scheme.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, so the draft budget. So we welcome the Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Improvement, Councillor Neil, and the Executive Director of Resources, Stuart McKellar. So please welcome, and can you present the draft capital and revenue budget proposals?
Thank you, Chair. Have we got slides? Yeah, perfect. Okay, I don't need them until later on, but I'll prompt you when we're there. So I want to start you all by thanking the Commission for inviting me this evening to look at the 25-26 budget proposals. Each December we set out where we plan to spend our money the following financial year and where we plan to make savings. This year our focus continues to be on protecting services for our most vulnerable residents and ensuring high quality frontline services. We're not immune to further costs, inflation and service demand rises, so we've had to look carefully at what we can afford to spend money on and where we may need to make savings. Together, the capital and revenue budget proposals put forward for consultation the Council's proposed spending and efficiencies needed to reach a balanced budget position. The picture of local government finance has not materially changed, and we continue to need to balance the needs of providing the standards and services residents of Bracknell Forest are accustomed to and making decisions that are in line with our spending power. There continue to be headwinds and uncertainty, and the proposals laid out in the report account for these. Furthermore, anticipated changes in local government funding allocation beginning in 26-27 could reduce future income for Bracknell Forest. Since the new government was elected in July, it was unrealistic to expect many changes in this year's budget cycle, so our proposed budget is designed to see us through the next year and avoid any decisions that we might regret in future. Consequently, the proposals are relatively uncontentious and do not significantly impact on our communities. Starting with the capital programme, the report outlines the Council's capital programme budget proposals for 25-26 to 27-28, focusing primarily on next year. The total proposed capital programme for 25-26 is 14.4 million, including 8.4 million funded by the Council and just under 6 million from external sources such as government grants, Section 106 contributions, capital receipts and borrowing. The key priorities in the programme include allocating 1.5 million to address the most urgent property maintenance needs, just under 1.3 million for new school places under the Basic Needs Grant, 500,000 allocated for housing stock maintenance, particularly for homelessness support, and continued investment in highways maintenance supported by the Integrated Transport Block and other grants. The capital programme emphasises maintaining critical infrastructure while balancing fiscal responsibility and community needs. The Council aims to manage ageing assets, fund essential services and invest in sustainability initiatives within the constraints of available funding. We do have an increased reliance on borrowing for the programme, which is a fine balance to strike. We have to be careful not to put further pressure on the revenue budget whilst properly maintaining our assets. In terms of the revenue proposals, the Council faces continued financial challenges, including inflationary pressures, increased service demands and uncertainty in funding. Total budget pressures amount to 8.4 million, which is driven by demand for social care and new legislation. We have identified £5.3 million in savings focusing on efficiency, income generation and support service reductions, resulting in a projected budget gap of just over 3 million. For next year, our base budget excluding schools is set to decrease slightly to 97.2 million before considering inflation. Our reserves remain relatively healthy and estimated to be 9.85 million by March 25, but we must not be complacent. To make the budget work, we're proposing some reductions to non-essential services. For example, we're looking at scaling back some grounds maintenance, cutting down the number of parking payment machines and closing the upper decks of Brackenwalk car park for 3 months a year. This would, at times the car park is less well used and will save £9,000 on business rates. We are also proposing to increase the residents' parking zone fees by £10 so the scheme can become self-funding, and the same with the brown bin garden waste service, increasing it by £5. Since we have received the provisional local government financial settlement shortly before Christmas, there has been no substantial changes to our thinking on the proposals, and in summary, the proposals are all in support of spending and efficiencies needed to reach a balanced budget position. As always, this administration is committed to wide public engagement, taking the council to residents. I am pleased that this year we are again holding in-person engagement sessions to hear the views of local residents on our proposals and encouraging participation in the consultation. We really do want to hear what residents think and value the opportunity to set out our opportunities and pressures. As a reminder, the consultation runs from the 11th of December, so started back in December, to the 21st of January, including engagement with business ratepayers, the schools forum and other stakeholders. Feedback will then be considered and the final budget will be recommended to Cabinet on the 11th of February. I want to pull out some of the key themes we have seen so far in the consultation. We have received over 70 responses so far, which is lower than last year, and the majority of those responses have been supportive or fairly neutral on the questions asked. Now might be a good time for slides, if that's all right. Sorry, if you can just go to the first one in the presentation. So slide 2 shows responses so far have indicated that there is less support for supporting households on low income with council tax reductions, with 50% of respondents saying they disagree or strongly disagree. Some of the comments suggest this is a central government responsibility or we should find other ways to support those on low incomes. This is quite different to the feedback the council has received previously on this topic. Support or otherwise for investing in council buildings and the magistrates' court to make them more energy efficient is about 50-50 and is shown on the next 2 slides. So the next slide is on council buildings. It shows the responses for that. And the one after that shows the responses of magistrates' courts. Other comments that we've received are on specific themes or ideas. If you go to slide 5, please. So I also wanted to talk about the consultation on discretionary rates relief this evening. We are holding sessions next week and we don't yet know the views of groups potentially affected, and also any revisions to the current policy, if agreed, would be subject to a minimum 12 months notice period for current recipients. Currently, the government provides an automatic 80% relief on business rates for charities, and local authorities can, at their discretion, offer relief on the remaining 20%. Bracknell Forest offers a blanket 20% discretionary relief to any eligible charity, regardless of an assessment of the overall benefit to the community of the organisation. The support is paid for out of the council's budget. This means that charities pay no business rates at all for commercial properties they occupy in Bracknell Forest. The cost of the current rate relief to Bracknell Forest taxpayers is £155,000 a year, and this is likely to increase year on year unless changes to the system are made. We are carrying out a consultation to seek views on bringing the local relief system more in line with what other authorities offer. Changes would aim to provide appropriate financial relief for charities supporting local people paid for by local taxpayers. Nationally, the average discretionary support offered by local authorities is 2.5% of the permitted 20%. Neighbouring local authorities and a large majority of other local authorities target their use of discretionary rates relief to support their own priorities and restrict relief available in various ways. For example, Wokingham limit the relief to £1,000 per charity, Reading provide it for a maximum of 1 year to financially vulnerable charities at risk of being unviable, and in West Berkshire it is subject to the level of free reserves and property type, reduced to 10% if service provision extends beyond the borough. There is no evidence that the system in Bracknell Forest has been reviewed since the council became a unitary authority in 1998. So we're carrying out a consultation to get people's views on making the local system fairer, more affordable, and bring it into line with what other councils offer. So alongside the budget consultation, this consultation is also running, and I would encourage anyone interested to join us at one of the engagement sessions specifically on this topic next week. The details are available on the website. We are particularly keen to hear from charitable organisations in receipt of discretionary rate relief, voluntary, community and faith sectors, Bracknell Forest residents and other interested individuals or organisations. And I just want to finish by saying that both consultations run until the 22nd of January, and I encourage people to complete them. It's residents' feedback that helps us shape a budget that reflects what our community needs and wants. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Stuart McKellar, are you presenting now, or are you?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to just do a little bit of a technical update on the impact of the finance settlement, perhaps before we go to questions.
Yes, let's do that. Yep, thanks.
So the papers in front of you show that the draft budget requirement based on the proposals published in December was 105.7 million. We anticipated at that point we'd get income of around 102.6, so that left a gap before any council tax increase of about £3.1 million. Should there be a maximum council tax increase implemented, and that decision has yet to be made, that would mean that we would receive a further 4.1 million, leaving resources available for risk mitigation against issues within the budget of just under £1 million, should that be the situation. So that was before the local government finance settlement. We had that announcement just before Christmas. So just there weren't a huge amount of changes in there, but with us some ups and downs in the grant. So we did get around £100,000 more new homes bonus grant, which has been welcome. However, the government has also made it very clear that is the last year in which that grant will be received. So that will be £1.1 million, which we won't benefit from in 2026-27. We had a small increase in the revenue support grant, but that was largely due to just the incorporation of a number of different grants within it. So in real terms, that's absolutely negligible. There was an increase in the domestic abuse safe accommodation grant of 53,000, but we believe that that is going to be ring-fenced specifically for that service, for those needs. So we don't think that's going to provide any extra resources for the general budget overall. So the big change was around the higher social care grant allocation. So the government had announced back in the 30th of October that they would be making available 600 million more for adult social care. Then when we received the policy statement at the end of November, that figure had increased 800 million, and the government found an extra 80 million over and above that when we got to the provisional finance settlement. So the amount that we're going to receive over and above what we expected was £200,000. So that does give us more flexibility. It's not a ring-fence grant, but normally we do look to social care grants to cover social care costs. And one other grant which was announced was around children's social care prevention. So that's a £250,000 grant, but the government has indicated that they will be increasing the allocation between the provisional and final settlement. So that will probably go up to around 263,000. We haven't yet seen what the conditions around that grant will be. They will be announced at the final settlement. So we don't know if it's to fund new government initiatives or if it's to help us support the proposals that we currently take forward through our outstanding children's social care team. We need to wait until the final settlement to see that. So in overall terms, we probably will be getting around an extra £320,000 of available funding to support the budget through the settlement, subject to the final details. So that does mean that there is a little bit of flexibility when we get to the final budget. However, the things that we'll need to give consideration to in that include the impact of the employer's national insurance increase. We have done a calculation that says that will cost about £1.2 million for Bracknell Forest Council. The government has not given indications of the specific amounts it will make available to individual authorities, but it did give an indication of the methodology it's minded to use. So if you work through that methodology, we would probably get somewhere in the order of £950,000, which is about £250,000 short. So we have responded to the provisional settlement consultation, pointing this out to government. So we hope that they will take that into account, and it does reflect very much the position that the Local Government Association reported, which was that the expected costs were significantly above the amount that was made available in the settlement. So we need to see if the government responds to that when we get to the final position. If not, that will be probably around £250,000 we need to add to the budget. The big number in the settlement was actually the Extended Producer Responsibility Grant. So we received £2.345 million from that. That was announced at the end of November. At the moment, we don't yet know what the specific conditions, if any, are associated with that grant. It's income which we are supposed to receive by transferring the cost of disposal of waste to the producers of that waste. So it's £2.3 million. We may need to spend it on something related to waste, but we don't yet have the information what that will be. As always, we will have another look at the pressures and savings in the draft budget proposals. They are pulled together and developed over the autumn. We have to draw a line under that process at the end of November. Inevitably, between November and February, things do change. So therefore, we always go back and have a look through it. For example, one of the issues that is in the draft budget proposals is a pressure for business rates on the high street car park of £135,000. Now, since November, we have made an appeal against that, which has been successful, and we have had a refund from ourselves of the business rates that we paid for that. So therefore, that will not need to be part of the final budget proposals, as an example. Other things that we will look at always is the level of demand pressures for adults and children's social care. They're always done on the basis of the most up-to-date information we have in December, but we always update that in January. So there will be ups and downs probably in the demand pressures for children's and adult social care. Those numbers are being worked through at the moment. Typically not significant changes, but there are always changes. Inflation is something that we'll have to come back to, especially in light of the national insurance increase. We did make a provision for inflation in the provisional budget and the draft budget. We'll come back and have a look at that. If there is flexibility, I think it would be sensible if we can go higher than the initial amount. I'm not going to talk specific figures at this moment in time because the care providers might be listening. But it's a figure that we recognise there is pressure on the cost of care providers due to the national living wage increase and the national insurance increase. We can't necessarily help them with all of those, but we do need to recognise them in our budget. And finally, we will come to the corporate contingency. It's held at the moment at £4 million, the same figure as in the 24-25 budget. We'll have a look at what the scale of the risks are that we see in the budget and come up with an appropriate recommendation for councillors around what the figure should be in the final budget proposal. So another couple of technical bits that we have to do is we have to calculate the expected position on collection of the collection fund by the end of this financial year. There will always be a surplus or a deficit. We're expecting at the moment there will be a deficit, particularly on the council tax side. All the councils across Berkshire are reporting that collection of council tax is down quite significantly this year compared to the norm. So therefore we are expecting quite a significant deficit on the collection fund for council tax when we come to the final budget. And that is part of the statutory calculation. So that is a prerequisite. We have to put that number into the final budget, whatever it is. And so quite a lot of work still to do on the budget, Chair, but if that gives you an indication of what we know at this moment in time.
Thank you very much. To you, we will open to questions. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both
Thank you very much for your presentations. My first question is, and I'm glad you alluded to it, Executive Director Resources, the national insurance, covering the national insurance rise, because of course the comment made by the government was that it would be covered in full, and a £250,000 shortfall is not insignificant. Would this be covered by revisiting, reductions to services, or would this be something that would be managed out of reserves? It's my first question. If it wasn't forthcoming, because I know it's a concern raised by significant numbers of councils around the country.
Yes. Through you, Chair, yes, we have made representations to government that they did commit to funding in full for the direct costs on the local authorities, so therefore that is our expectation. If that doesn't come to fruition, then we do, as I said, have some flexibility within the final budget, so that would be one of the most important calls on it. It's a cost that we cannot avoid. We know what the cost will be, so therefore we have to allow for it.
Thank you. My second question, thank you, Chair, is relating to the borrowing requirement for capital spend and things. There's strong evidence coming out that interest rates are not going to fall as fast as been anticipated, and that inflation is going to be staying, a little bit higher than was expected probably 6 months ago. Is £200,000+ worth of borrowing costs sustainable going forward, given that we expect to receive less money in future years? And it says there that this is going to kick in at 200k from 26-27. And what does MRP stand for? Because I know what it stands for in terms of a producer type thing, but what does net of MRP mean? Because again, I think it's if we're borrowing money to spend on capital, we need to recognise and understand that those costs might stay pretty high for longer at a time when we're seeing a reduction in money, basically. And I just got one other question, Chair, after that, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. If I'm able to respond to that, Chair. So MRP is minimum revenue provision. In simple terms, it's principal repayment rather than interest repayment of loans.
Okay, so it's like in a repayment mortgage.
It is it's a repayment part of the repayment mortgage, yes. In terms of the borrowing costs, it is a balance, as Councillor Neil said in her introduction. Yes, it does add pressure to the revenue budget. However, if we don't invest in our current assets, they will deteriorate faster, and therefore potentially all you're doing is leaving that cost to a later date, at which point it will most probably be higher. So it's a balance around how much you invest in your assets.
My final question, you talked about the discretionary rates relief. Is one of the questions that we're very directly asking all our charitable organisations what the impact of the national insurance rise is going to be on their operations, because we have, I know, a combination of national and local charities that have provision in Bratton Forest, because this is a significant cost, and actually more widely I think there's a concern that some smaller care providers and leisure providers might actually go out of business as a consequence of the increased costs because they work on tight margins. So there's an element of risk and things. I'll be actually asking that very direct question because it's of material significant concern to all businesses, but particularly the charitable section, which have already been hit quite hard.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we haven't asked that question directly. The consultation is centred around. So we've not asked questions about their specific circumstances. What we've asked is, what do they want to see and be able to provide in future within and the options for what the scheme might look like in future. We can't get away from the fact that the scheme that we currently offer is incredibly generous. The national average is 2.5%. We offer the full 20%. So the consultation is centred around looking at what are the options for what we want it to look like here in Bracknell Forest. So lots of different charities have lots of different considerations as part of their operation. So we've got the engagement sessions next week where we expect to be able to have quite open conversations with people as part of the consultation, and that's something that we can bring up as part of discussion with them in those sessions, what understanding what the impact might be. I'm really looking forward to having those sessions next week and kind of hearing what the charities want to say, what they want to relay to us. So it's not directly in the consultation now, but it's definitely something we can pick up as part of that conversation next week. However, I would just emphasise the scheme that we currently have is very generous, and I don't think it's not in its current format. It can't probably continue as it is, and that's the purpose of the consultation. So, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Eggleston, then Councillor Forster.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. We know the continued healthcare budget through Thrimley ICB is a lot harder for residents to get, and the council's having to fight harder to actually help the residents get that. What impact is that going to have on the budget for social care, please? Thank you.
If I may, Chair, yes, there are pressures within the budget which reflect the reduction in income that we're receiving from the health system. It is an ongoing conversation. Gráinne Signes, our Exec Director for People, is very actively involved in those. He's pushing very hard for the case to be made for Bracknell Forest residents to be supported as well as they are in some other areas. And you know, it's not necessarily as generous as here in others, but undoubtedly, if we're reducing, if income from health is reducing to us, then it does have a negative impact.
Thank you, Councillor Forster.
This is a question about the risk that's inherently within the budget. Obviously, you've identified a number of areas and you're making a series of assumptions around specific areas in order to create a budget. And I just want to get some of your thinking behind that. And there are a couple of areas, 3 areas that I just want to ask about. Firstly, social care demand. When you delve into it, there's an expectation that reduces. Numbers are one of the documents. Yeah. The second one is around the impact of inflation and actually the worst case scenario and the risks that you're currently using, the assumptions you're using for that risk to come to fruition. What are they? And the final one is the risks inherent around asset degradation if we don't maintain an asset maintenance program at a level which is going to keep those assets at a reasonable standard today.
If I would take those, Chair, perhaps hand across to you to just talk about how politically you look at the risk, but in terms of the technical side of it. So the way in which we approach the budget for children's social care and adult social care demand, there's 2 elements to it. Firstly, we do a calculation that rolls forward the financial impact of the current caseload and the current costs that we're paying for those cases. We do that both for children's and adults. So the starting point in the base budget provision for the People Directorate will include the actual costs projected forward into next year for what we see as the current position that we face. We then, for both children's and adults, add an assumption around what demand will increase between when the budget is set and March 2026, the end of the financial year. So for both of them, that's based on estimates. It has to be based on estimates, but they are informed by what has happened in the past. So, for example, in children's social care, we will add additional new placements equivalent to the average of the new placements we have seen over the past 4 years. Will be added as an amount to the contingency when we get to the final budget proposal. So the main budget proposal for the People Directorate will have the actual cost of known care, and that includes people who we know will leave care and transition from children's social care to adult social care. So all of that is built into the costs. It's the contingency allocation really is the bit where we're trying to predict the unknown. So for both children's and adults, we've looked at what has happened in the past few years and rolled that forward as an expectation that demand will increase. In adults, the figures are bigger because we have known people who will transition from children to adults, and that's the biggest single pressure in our budget. We also have an expectation there will be other people who we don't yet know about in the system who will also go into adult social care, and they will be expensive because they will have needs which perhaps may not be addressed in children's social care. They might be in the education system and then go into adults, and we may not have quite as much visibility. But we make an allowance for both the transitions and the general ageing population within the budget provision for adult social care. So what might happen in the future is always included in the contingency. What is happening now is always included in the core budget proposals. So that was the first question. The second question, in terms of inflation, yes, we make different allowances for different costs with inflation. So we have a provision for pay costs based on what we think they may be, and that at the moment we've got in at forgive me, it's either 2.5% or 2.75% for pay inflation that we've built in. We then build in for non-contractual inflation for most items what the CPI figure was in September, which is 1.7%. We then look where we have contracts, such as for social care, around what is the market looking like. And in terms of where we are at the moment, we are kind of mid-range relative to our neighbours in terms of what we're looking to put in the draft budget proposals for social care provider inflation. We're going to have a look at that though between now and when the final budget is set, to look at the relative risks of that. And it's not purely related to what the inflationary costs are that the providers will expect to see. It takes account of where we are relative to other authorities in terms of what we currently pay. Because some authorities will currently pay more than others. The authorities that pay lower will be subject to higher inflationary pressures quite reasonably, because the providers will look to them and say they're not currently covering their costs. We are relatively mid-range in terms of what we pay for a lot of our care costs, so therefore we're not at the bottom, so we don't think that the majority of our care providers should be seeing the kind of 7-8% increases in their actual costs relative to what we're paying for them for now. But so it's quite a scientific piece of work to inform the judgment, but it is at the end of the day a judgment around what is affordable relative to the risks that the providers face. And apologies, I've forgotten your third question. Assets. Sorry, the specific question.
So, this is about reducing the operational expenditure. Sorry, this is about any plans to reduce the operational expenditure on capital buildings or whatever it is in order to save on the revenue budget. So basically the old stitch in time saves 9. So by reducing the maintenance on a building, you may save that year, but actually it degrades much faster. It's a trade-off. It's a risk on the assets that the council owns. So what is our approach and assumptions around how much risk we're going to accept about the maintenance of our assets?
Thank you. Again, that's a bit of a judgment. We do have detailed condition surveys of all of our assets. So for many, many years, as long as I can remember, that's further than I'd like to think I remember. At Bratton Forest, we've only ever looked at the category 1, so the top priority maintenance elements. So that's all we've ever funded. That's all we've had the resources to fund. So we haven't found through that the level of backlog maintenance has significantly increased over the period of the past decade, to be honest. There's always a fairly high backlog maintenance, but as with you, with your own personal house, there's always work that needs done. You focus on what the top priorities are at a point in time, and you eventually will come to the rest of it as and when they come to the top priority. It's a very similar approach to how we manage our assets, just on a much bigger scale.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie Boyle.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Chair. Can we just quickly return to charities, please? Will you be looking at charities in a granular fashion? There are charities that are national, and there are charities in Crowthorne High Street which are local. Will they be treated the same?
So as I said earlier, so the proposals are out for consultation at the minute. So obviously we know what business rates relief is given to each charity, but the purpose of what we're doing now is the consultation to establish what any potential new scheme might look like in future. So we're not making any decisions about individual charities. We're not making any decisions about anything. The importance right now is really the consultation to find out what could work in future and what's relevant for Bracknell. So,
Right. Surely you need to plan. So would the plans come into your consideration? I mean, this is a consultation, so we're asking what is going to be looking like. Do you have a view of that?
I don't have a view what a potential scheme might look like. No, that's the purpose of the consultation.
Okay.
Councillor Haverty.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so we're very keen on the consultation process that's currently going on with the budget itself. And anything we can do to increase the wider participation is great. And budgets can be quite complex and quite number focused. So last year when we were looking at this, we suggested the idea of having personas. We would have different personas and, you know, different people, how the budget would affect them in different ways. I was just wondering, and it sounded like that was going to be progressed. I was wondering how that stands at the moment, if that was being looked at. I haven't seen any information about that. Thanks.
If I can answer that one, Chair. Yes, it was something that we were very mindful of, and myself and Elena, the head of comms, when we were working with Catherine to design the budget consultation, we did have a hard look at that. The challenge that we have in this year's budget is because standstill is not quite the right word, but there's nothing particularly significant in this year's budget. So when we try to look at what would be the impact for different types of individuals, we were really struggling to think what it would be, because actually in terms of the resonant impact of these budget proposals, there's very little, if anything. So when you try to look at the personas, it was about what was the impact on a person aged 18 to 24, on an older person. Actually, through this particular budget proposal, that there are very little impacts, so therefore it was hard to identify the different impact on different personas. So, but it is something we're very mindful of, and we will come back to, I suspect, some more challenging and difficult and more impactful changes in future years. So the concept of personas is very much in our minds to do that. We just couldn't quite make it work for this year's particular budget.
Do you think that's why, based on your answer just then, why there was a lower number of responses to the consultations this year? If not, why do you think there were?
So I think there's two things playing into it. I think there were some proposals in last year's budget which perhaps attracted more attention, that people wanted to feedback on, which, as Stuart's just alluded to, there's not really anything in this year's proposals that are like that. And actually, some of the comments on the consultation responses allude to the fact that, it's sort of, not very dramatic. I think lacklustre was one of the words that I saw in the responses. But, as I said earlier, there's going to be changes in future years what the funding looks like for local government, and we really, this year is all about kind of holding a position that keeps us stable for those years, and making sure that we're not taking any decisions that's going to perhaps negatively impact us in future. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor McLean, then Evelyn.
Thank you, Chair. Of the £4.5 million increase in adult social care costs, do we have a view as to how much of that is a knock-on effect from a private sector care service providers having to cope with changes in the minimum wage and national insurance contributions increases? That's my first question.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. None of that relates to those. That will be dealt with through the inflation provision. So, what the increase in adult social care budget is mainly made up of is people transitioning from children to adult social care. So that's the £2.5 million of the increase that is related solely to that. So that's not that's new placements in place. So it's not around providers being impacted by increases in costs that they're facing.
My second question is, will the national insurance contributions and increase in the minimum wage impact on local charities be a factor in any decision making that you're planning to take when you're reviewing the business rates policy? Because my concern is if local charities see increases on all three fronts at the same time, that could well significantly and detrimentally impact their ability to trade, and will also perhaps the potential loss of business rates if they do cease to trade be a factor in the decision making. Thank you.
So there's a minimum 12-month notice period, so it wouldn't be in the same time frame. We will look at lots of different. If you've seen the consultations are available on the website, so please do take a look and look at the questions that we're asking. There's lots of different factors here as to what's going into the scheme, what charities are receiving. As I said before, the scheme that we have is incredibly generous, and also is perhaps offered to some charities that are more than financially solvent. And so that's, the point of the scheme is to make it fairer, is to make it more affordable, and we're not looking to have a detrimental impact on charities, but the scheme has to be fair.
Councillor Everley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A question to Councillor Neil. Regarding the budget consultation, you said you had a disappointingly low number of responses so far, just 70, I think to quote, if I quote you correctly. You also said that the responses were different to what you expected based on last year's responses. Is that an effect of a different quorum of people who are replying to these to this consultation? Or are you seeing roughly a representative cross-section of Bracknell residents responding to your consultation? Thank you. That's the question.
So I can comment on the results I've seen so far. Obviously, we've still got until the 22nd of January for the consultation to run. So when I checked earlier today, there were 76 responses, which, as we said earlier, is slightly lower than it was last year, is significantly higher than it has been in previous years when we used to get less than maybe 10 responses to the consultation throughout the whole period. So I've not delved into the demographics, but on a kind of high level view, every area of the borough is represented, and I think the result that I called out that was slightly different to what we've seen previously was the lack of support for low income households, which I think is a theme that we've not seen previously. But yeah, that was that one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got a question about the property maintenance, page 13.6.7. Be useful to hear, and for residents to hear, why it's beneficial, why you think it's beneficial for the council to retain the assets that we're investing in. They clearly require a significant amount of money. What would be the implications for each of the council's assets if we don't approve the costs associated with the maintenance? So as Stuart said earlier, everything in the kind of proposals is all about balance. The age of Bracknell and the fact that it was a new town means that a lot of things were built at the same time. So it's about balancing our investment so that we're maintaining assets that are all aging at exactly the same time. Put simply, if we don't invest in them, they will deteriorate. Yeah, which leaves us asking, what would we do if we didn't have a leisure centre, for example? These are bring significant value to the area, and they require significant investment, and presumably that adds up to why the numbers are what they are. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much. And I just want to cover a little bit on the leisure side of things, because, of course, one of the things that Bracknell Forest achieved over a number of years was continuing to invest in its leisure facilities, which is quite important. My question is, we have a contract with a leisure provider where they make a fixed payment to us on an annual basis. There's been a lot of coverage in the news that says that the national insurance and minimum wage changes will hit organisations like that quite hard. On the basis that there is no provision for our provider during a contract to come back to negotiate different rates, for Councillor Neil, my question is, how do you feel, or do you have any insight into how leisure providers might actually make up any shortfall or concerns, given that they're contractually, enforceably and contractually made to pay us a sum of money every year?
I mean, thank you for the question, but if I'm perfectly honest, I don't have any specific knowledge on it. I don't have any specific information. I think it's definitely something that we need to go away and probably look into, given obviously the arrangement that we have. So yeah, thank you, and I'll definitely take that away.
If it's helpful, a quick look on websites, internet and news articles will highlight the fact that the only way you're going to recoup that money is by increasing access fees to leisure provision from residents of Bracknell Forest. And that could be of concern, particularly as we're also receiving concerns back from families who still find themselves pressed by the cost of living. So my concern is, we have this contractual arrangement, they're being hit by a double whammy of cost increases, I'd be interested how the Cabinet is going to look at making sure that leisure access is still affordable, because as has been said, it's a great asset that we've got in the borough, and I would really welcome some discussion how we do that to mitigate what could be quite a significant change and reduction in use and access, which will, further compound things going forward.
Can I just, I completely agree, and I'll pick up with my colleague, Cabinet colleague, who's got responsibility for leisure as well, and we'll come back to you with a response if that's okay.
Councillor Forster.
Just picking up something that Stuart said earlier on about the reduced council tax payment. What did you actually call it? Yeah. So I just wondered for you, Councillor Neil. We've obviously just talked about personas and their impact, but there are those struggling families where a 5% increase on council tax is going to hurt. And just recognising that we've got a reduced payment across the boroughs, similar boroughs to ours, and when you start taking families who are struggling in that sort of persona, a family which is maybe on minimum wage or really struggling, I just wonder, have you done the analysis or got an understanding of what our budget is going to mean for those struggling families when we hit them with a 5% council tax increase, which I'm assuming whatever it is going to be the maximum we can charge, I'm sure that's the assumption. Do you have a feel for what that means to them?
So to the point earlier that we discussed around the question in the consultation around support for low-income households, we offer a £100 discount on council tax bills for low-income households. So that's something that obviously we feel really strongly about and want to be able to offer support to families in that situation. We've got the Financial Hardship Fund. There is lots of support and help for people out there in that situation. So as always, take the opportunity to encourage people to seek help that they need. But as I said, in the consultation, that is something that we're proposing to maintain that £100 reduction in council tax for those families.
You're confident we're going to be able to provide the support needed on the increases that inevitably come? Is that what I'm hearing?
So the £100 council tax reduction is in the proposals for this year. Obviously, it's out for consultation at the minute, but that it's in there. It's factored into the proposals.
Thank you. Lots of very questions. I've got one to finish, which is on the one more there. Housing planned maintenance. So page 14, 6.14. The housing stock, which was returned by Downshire Homes. Does it require a lot of investment? And if so, why aren't Downshire Homes liable for that?
Through your chair, it has had a lot of investment over the last number of years from Downshire Homes Limited. So there has been very, very significant amounts put into some of the properties before they transfer back to the council. However, I think it's important to recognise, as a wholly owned company of the council, our finances are fairly intertwined with those of DHL. So the way in which DHL was financed was primarily from loans from Bratton Forest Council. So therefore, we have helped for many years actually DHL to fund it, but that was deliberately because we set up DHL to run the properties under a particular arrangement.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Two questions. It won't surprise Stuart at all for me to refer again, and he'd be surprised perhaps if I didn't, to the fact I regard the highway network as an asset of the council. And given, Councillor Neil, your point about assets ageing at a rate due to the fact they're all built at the same time, clearly the suburban road network is very important to our residents, and it's always a pressure on being able to afford to repair the roads, and clearly principal roads attract most of the investment because they need to be repaired to allow most movements of traffic. But how confident are we that we are going to be able to maintain the suburban roads to a standard that our residents would hope and expect? That's the first question. And the second question is to Stuart. Given the generally the rate of council council tax collection has been about 98% or thereabouts, roughly. Do you have a feel for what that percentage might be?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first question for me? Is that
Sorry, I just wonder what provision is there or what's affordable in terms of repairing and maintaining suburban roads as opposed to strategic roads, given the constraints on public finances that our residents obviously use every day?
So we have had increased funding in terms of maintaining our road network. So last year and this year there is more funding available to be able to maintain those roads. So in line with our what we said needs to be done, we are in a better position to be able to do that work.
And through you, Chair, on the collection rate, yes, you're absolutely right, Councillor McLean, it has typically been around 98%. The profile of council tax collection has changed quite a lot in recent years because more people are taking advantage of the ability to pay over 12 months rather than 10 months. So it's not easy to make an accurate projection, but we think we are going to be below 98%, possibly around 97.5%. But we've still got a few months of the year to go, and our revenues team will be sending regular reminders over that period.
Okay, going to take one final question from Councillor Eggleston.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Regarding South Hill Park, is it actually our responsibility to do the upkeep on it? Because I thought they had a 125-year lease with Bracknell. Is it Bracknell Holdings? So if it is our responsibility, how much have we been putting away as a council to cover this over the years? And if it's not our responsibility, but we're helping them because they really need it, is this just a one-off payment, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, it's a question that does come up very regularly, and I can't remember the very specifics, but there is an agreement in place with Bracknell, with South Hill Park Trust to run the building, but the council does have ownership responsibilities for it, and because it is an old historic building, it does have quite a lot of maintenance needs. So I can't provide you with the figures tonight, but we'll be able to come back with what the money that has been spent over the last number of years on it. The trust do put their hands in their pockets when they can afford to do so, so it doesn't all fall to this council, but a large proportion of it does.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now be asked for comments or recommendations to the Cabinet. So if you do wish to speak or make a recommendation, you can speak for up to 5 minutes. If you anybody else who wants to speak but doesn't want to make a recommendation, please keep it to up to 3 minutes. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much. First of all, can I thank both Councillor Neil and the Executive Director Resources for their open answers to questions. It strikes me that this year is a bit of a holding budget because there's no getting away from the fact that under the government's proposals for redistribution, we could find ourselves seeing a significant, only reduction is significant, but a significant reduction in funding in the future years, and that of course does give concern around sustainability, particularly on revenue and borrowing. I guess I have three things I would want to see some sort of reassurance from to the recommendation. One is, really being quite open with us all about the risks in all of this. There are quite a few financial indicators coming out at the moment that says that inflation could well remain higher for longer, which could produce additional pressures on borrowing costs and things like that going forward. And of course also, some suggestion that because of the current economic indicators, that the headroom for public spending could actually be a little bit tighter going forward. So, the national picture doesn't look particularly rosy at the moment, and that is a huge concern. I think in particular around the risk, and I think Councillor Foster was really talking about it, one is we need to be really, really quite clear, as much as we can in public, about the potential risk to the costs of adult social care providers because of the national minimum wage and national insurance rise. Now, there are those that will say that, that those are the right things to do, but there is a cost and implication, and there's emerging evidence that there is, considerable uncertainty among some providers And I suspect we're no different to any other council having some smaller providers which are specialist, which could be particularly at risk, because it's a myth that these companies operate on huge margins. I think the second thing I'm really interested in the Cabinet exploring is, and I touched upon it in the leisure thing, which is what will actually be the impact on residents of these changes given the contracts that we have in place for the provision of leisure. You know, to be clear that it's not actually directly the council's responsibility if the cost to access the service increases, because that's a cost that has, you know, been passed on to those suppliers. So just being really clear that we're committed to supporting these, but I am concerned about access. I think more widely, we've seen already this winter a number of hospitals declaring emergencies around increased access of older people in particular, emergencies being declared, you know, due to sort of temperature-related things like that, just to have some understanding if there is an ongoing impact on the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance. You know, we can debate and discuss that elsewhere, and we understand why where we are. We debate it full council, but it'd be interesting to know if we're actually assessing where some of these risks are, because
Sorry to stop you mid-flow, but if you could shape these into clear recommendations that we can vote on.
Okay, my first recommendation is that the Cabinet really looks in detail at the risks that have been articulated in this meeting. I think that's really, really important, because when we set a budget, for example, with potentially 250k drift on the national insurance against the government, you know, assurance that we reach the full cost. My second recommendation is that we also have some understanding of the impact these changes are having on residents directly through services that are outside our direct control. The reason for that is so that we're totally transparent with our residents, that where we are not responsible, we can't be held responsible for changes there. My third recommendation is that ONS has some really good and strong input in the year ahead, in advance of September, if we think the funding formula and framework is going to be challenging future years, so we can take a really, really early look at areas of service where there are concerns, because, you know, if we start doing that at the sort of budget cycle September onwards, there is really no time to shape proposals.
Thank you.
And if I can make an observation finally, because it's both recommended observations, I find it very difficult for anyone to comment on any scheme being potentially fair, and I'm talking here about the business rates review, if actually no detail of the scheme has come out, because ultimately you would judge a scheme whether it's fair by the outcome of that, not before you go into it. I recognise we might be out of kilter with other councils, but maybe there's some things that we should be proud of in the way that we support charitable organisations, particularly with the hit they've had from national insurance and the national minimum wage and other related costs.
Thank you. Shall we vote on each of those recommendations? Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I was just going to add, if I might, the 2 points I made, which were first, I'd urge the Cabinet to take account of the other financial pressures that are now impacting charities in the form of national insurance contribution increases and the living wage, national minimum wage impact when coming to any views about the business rates. And the other is urging the Cabinet to take account of the need to maintain and preserve the suburban road network in Bracknell Forest, in addition to strategic highways.
Councillor Haverty.
Yeah, okay. The persona idea that we had sort of last year was a really good idea. And I know the executive director said that this year's not great for that. I would like to see that rolled forward in future years. So I think bringing that back would be quite useful. Thanks.
Any further comments or recommendations for other commissioners? Okay, should we take each of those in turn then, please? Yeah, does anybody have an issue with any of those recommendations or want to comment on them? No? Okay, well, let's do that then. Would you mind, do you have the, yes, please.
I think the first one is that propose that Cabinet looks in detail at the risks that have been articulated in this meeting. to understand the impact of changes to residents around services that are out of direct control of the council. That ONS has a stronger input in advance of September around the budget, so they can look earlier at the budget. For Cabinet to take account of the need to maintain suburban highways. For the use of personas to be used during the consultation in next year's budget. And I think I may have missed one out. Oh, financial impacts impacting charities.
Sorry, what was the second one?
Services not directly controlled,
Yeah.
understanding of the leisure side of things.
Oh, it was leisure, relating to leisure.
What that could be.
Okay, let's take a vote on all of those together as recommendations to the Cabinet. Who supports? Okay, that's unanimous. So thanks again to the Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Improvement, and also the Executive Director for Resources, for their presentation and really thorough answers to our very many questions. Thank you for your time. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 7. And before we move on to that, we welcome Councillor Watts online. Councillor Watts, if you can hear us, can you confirm your attendance, please? And we'll make note of it.
Yes, thank you. I'm here.
Thank you. Welcome. Agenda item 7 is the draft climate change strategy. As declared at the start of the meeting, Councillor Haffajee and Councillor Mackenzie Boyle have both won't be participating as part in this session. We will welcome them back later. So now we'll welcome the Leader of the Council, Councillor Temperton. Please present the draft climate change strategy, Councillor.
Right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. This is an exciting time. Well, actually, I'm really nervous about this because it's sort of a bit of a baby for me, this. And it started in July 2023 when we had our first summit. And out of that summit came the Joint Climate Action Board, which has 10 different sectors so that we can also involve the communities in it. And one of those sectors is the sector that belongs of councillors' members. And that's why 2 councillors have had to move off to this evening, because they've been very, very active part of that Joint Climate Action Board in writing this strategy. And this strategy really, it reflects our ambition and our commitment to make a difference and to get to net zero as near 2023 as possible, as was in the resolution and the motion that we passed. And also to reduce emissions in a way that is fair and financially responsible. And I think you've all had the papers, and the papers, when we actually saw the result of what the officers have put together with this, it was really exciting, because all those members of the councillor sector got together and we each took on a climate change strategy of all our neighbouring authorities and looked at them all and saw what was good about them and what needed improving and what we'd like to save and put into Bracknell Forest climate strategy and what we would not like to see. And so it's very different than the previous one. It had to be made, but it's very ambitious. There's a lot of detail in there. And for the aims and objectives, you'll see that every aim is underneath that. There's the things that the council have already achieved. Then there's key objectives, then there's priority action, then there's the benefits, and then there's the monitoring. And if we look at the different slides that are coming up now, and the first one is about the aims that we're going for. There's 3 aims there. There's a net zero, and there are different levels to that. There's a net zero. There's a net zero, which is, first of all, the council emissions, then the borough emissions, because I'd remind everybody that the council is only responsible for 2% of the net emissions across Bracknell Forest. The 98% are due to everybody else. So we have a big influence, and we can't possibly just concentrate on the borough. You can see the priority areas there are buildings and energy supply, transport, land, the use of land, the fact that methane pours out of land that's badly used, economy and waste. And waste is a big issue, and waste is one where we do spend a lot of money that we shouldn't be spending on taking things to landfill when it could go out to other places. We support the residents. The 1C is to support the residents to reduce their net emissions more directly. And that's really the rest of the 9 members of the Joint Climate Action Board are all from the sectors, and they're all working extremely efficiently and really well in order to take up projects and make sure they have their monitoring as well. And we should have a climate strategy for the community launched this summer. Adaptation, we prepare for the anticipated impacts of climate change. That's greater heat, different biodiversity, changes in the water consumption, change in water, the resources, energy resources, buildings, planning and the rest. Effects on the council, but also the effects on the borough. And then the green economy, really trying to make Bracknell a centre for green business, a place where we could actually invest in the green economy, where we could have industry that produces it, we could have apprenticeships to go with it, and we could actually make sure that we are part of a very vibrant green economy. So that's our aims. And the second slide shows how we actually got there with the principles. So making sure the journey to net zero is fair to everyone. And that's quite hard to make. It can be fair if we can get their commitment, or we can show how it affects them and how we're, and this is going across the borough. It involves a lot of volunteers working on this as well as us. Working with the support and supporting others, making financial responsible decisions based on evidence, focusing on the needs and priorities of Bracknell Forest. We are part of the Prosperity Board, and that has we are the main lead on the green environment for the Prosperity Board, but the main issue for this board and for this strategy is concentrating on Bracknell. We have to get Bracknell sorted, and it's elsewhere that we're concentrating on the rest of Berkshire. Ensuring climate action delivers other benefits where possible, tackling climate change collectively as an organisation, and this has been a really big part, getting on training up every member of staff, making sure it's part of every agenda, making sure that when we're procuring things and how we're getting anything, be it the travel and the transport, we're looking at absolutely everything that involves climate change. Harnessing innovation and technical development. This is ongoing, and we have done some with some of our residents innovate and harnessing it. We've done this ourselves. Some of it we have with solar panels, but not to the same extent as some of us would like to move and as fast as some of us would like to move. You can see from the onion diagram, the famous onion diagram, how the council influences and its role. All the way through there, it says we've got interest in council assets, considering climate in procurement. Then we have further out, the creamy one is the stronger influence and considering climate when setting policy and delivering place-shaping actions. The third one is really showcasing enabling good practice, showing what can be done, spreading the good news, getting others to buy into it and taking it on board, providing targeted support, and also facilitating and bringing others together and making community cohesion. And we are growing in the number of people who are actually buying into this and are becoming really active in all our sectors. Primary influence elsewhere is lobbying national government and others for finance, for support, for making sure the grid changes, for making sure that we can actually do things locally, which would be possible, which is more difficult at the moment with things as they are. And then the different actions will be relevant at other levels of influence, and this shows how we're going to go. And then at the bottom, oh yeah, that's it, you can see it. So that's the onion diagram. And then this is the delivery, and there's 3 different phases. So there's phase 1, and they are there is the transition, and that's when we start looking and planning and doing research and the action and the exploratory work, and you get to where we're going to go. That's this year. Then we have phase 2, where we're laying the groundwork and we're bringing to capacity, developing the skills, making business cases, getting businesses on board, getting other people on board, and getting everybody within our organisation really buying into this. And then the third one is the delivery action at scale, and everything will be in place to actually move it forward. The enablers are the organisation capacity and skills which we need to build up, the funding, communications engagement ongoing, talking at one of the budget consultations in Crowthorne yesterday made me realise how far we have to go. Partnership and support. And then the governance is there will be a new climate change strategy board created to scrutinise delivery. And the progress report, this is officers and experts, they'll be reporting to this new board every quarter. And the full annual report, as it's written in the motion, will go to the full council every year with how much carbon emission has been saved and what has been effective, and indeed if things have not been so efficient, what can be done to make sure that they are improved. Then we have the delivery plan and how we are investing to try and make sure this happens. There is a lot of monitoring going on. There's a lot of need to get out there into different areas and make sure that we are setting up these industries, that we're looking at our procurement plans. Also the capital budget items, you've got boilers, you've got ceiling installation, I think that's in Priestwood Community Centre, the flood prevention and drainage work, Doors and windows replacement, ventilation improvements, that's recommended for. One of the areas is where Involve is, where the people shivered to death. Actually, those volunteers in Involve during the winter, it's not ideal, and that would put in double glazing in their area and make it a better environment for them. And it includes a lot of volunteers that are working in there. And that is, and the delivery plan outline options for actions to take place in phase 1, and it also provides an indicative list of large-scale actions to be considered in future phases. And on the actual strategy, there's lots more detail about what all the actions are, the costing of them, and how they'll be monitored. So there's actions, there's monitoring, and there's ways in which we can say whether we're progressing forward and what needs to be done. There has been a lot done. There's been solar panels. Solar Together has been really successful. Solar Together is where you advertise for different residents to buy their solar panels by a reputable company, and it's been taken off, and there's quite a lot. We need to do an audit on that to see just how successful it has been. EV charging, we have reduced waste. Food waste is taken out. That's really successful. Active transport is taking off. There's lots of cycling clubs and things like that now. We have retrofitted some of our buildings. There's electric vehicles as part of this council vehicles. Lots of tree planting, and we've certainly reduced landfill. But there's so much more that needs to be done. And this is the strategy for the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Temperton, we will open to questions. Councillor McCain.
Thank you. Could I refer to slide 6 out of the 7, please? You said we're in phase 1. What is your understanding or expectation of the timing to transition from phase 1 to phase 2 and then to phase 3?
No. 1 year for phase 1 to set it all up and get going and appoint the people and get the right everything in place, really, and to do the right plans and to get the right governance and to do the right measurements and to work out what we're looking at and what we can do and in each place. And then in phase 2, it doesn't mean to say there's nothing much going on in that place, because there are simple things in that last bit in the strategy. You can see there are things, quick fixes, that can also be accomplished in that year, because I need something to say at the end of the year, we've measured something, there's something improved. So this is in phase 1, but a lot more of it is the planning and the making sure we get the transition to actually be in a position to, and then phase 2 is the next year to accelerate. And then the phase 3 will be the last 2 years to actually get it in and implement those plans.
Thank you. Damien James.
Sorry, thank you, through you, Chair. Just to add to Councillor Temperton's description there. So phase 1, phase 2, really, we're already starting that process of phase 1. We've been working very hard, as you can see, on the strategy, and it's difficult to kind of put it into specific years. So we would expect phase 1 and phase 2 to kind of merge together, certainly over the 25-26 financial year. And then phase 3 also, we would look to start to deliver as much as we can within the next financial year as well. So it kind of rolls together, and it's difficult to split it out year on year.
But nobody's going to stop doing that because it's not in the next phase. It's going to be go, 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 really.
Are there other councils that you are looking to that are ahead of Bracknell that have done
Oxford.
Right.
By about, they're down to minus whatever, and they haven't got 0 now, they've got their minus. No, it's Oxford, and we work quite closely with them. We're going to invite one of their main people to come to the next joint Climate Change Action Board to actually tell us how they did it, what they did it, and everything. One of the big things they did was not recycle. They didn't use recycle, they used the word reduce. And I think so it's simple things like that, but having that as a priority of what you did and how they did it has made a big difference. And they're throughout their council, which is throughout what we did now also with schools and everything. I go to so many schools and loads of schools. I've always gone into reduce, reuse and recycle. And so that's what I say, the 3 R's, and they all have to say what it actually means and how it's going to affect their life and what they're going to do. And yeah, so it's getting the wording and the feeling and the moving into making a difference.
Thank you. Councillor Eberle.
Okay, it's working now. No, first, thank you very much, Councillor Temperton and the Joint Climate Action Board for the excellent work. Also, I think it's very laudable that we are willing to make actual investments, real financial commitments to combat climate change, which is one of the biggest challenges we're currently facing as a society. Now, out of interest, I mean, we are having a revenue budget proposal of in total 250k, of which 140k is additional headcount, which we want to engage. This headcount obviously is maybe would have to be recruited from a relatively competitive market because clearly climate change is on everybody's mind. What are these staff doing, and how can we ensure that we retain these staff, we can keep their knowledge up to date, that they can be trained? And the follow-up question is, has consideration been given to use part of the revenue budget to procure external support from any consultancy to fundamentally also bring in emerging best practices from the industry, which might be hard to follow by a small team like ours?
Thank you. We are working with universities, and I think Royal Holloway has been in and talked to us at a time, and Reading is a superb university as far as climate change is concerned, and they don't seem to swint at all about giving their information and helping with us, so we can involve with them. There are other experts that are actually volunteers that have come forward. There's one of the people who works at Royal Holloway. He's one of our volunteers in one of those sectors that's actually given us a lot of advice for cheap, for free, and telling us how to behaviour change and how to concentrate on making sure people feel they're getting a real financial, economical benefit by doing that, and that's a way to make behaviour change. So there's lots of volunteers who are actually coming forward and doing that. Yeah, the training is really important. We have got Will on board now that has joined us, and he was not a climate change person before, but my goodness, he's got into it and taken off, I think, and training very, and so I think because it's a passion and they can see, and they've got lots of contacts with all the different every council has got something and someone that's very passionate about this. So by talking to all the different councils, they get a lot out of it as well. Would you like to add to that?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yeah, just to continue Councillor Temperton's discussion. So we have a small team at the moment of 2 staff with another 0.5, so 2.5 staff who are working on climate change. At the moment, the proposal, as you see, which is included in the budget proposals, is an additional 3 staff. So that would be made up of 2 full-time employees and an apprentice. And that's one of the ways that we can encourage people to join our organisation by having apprenticeships, both to attract people within to the organisation and to retain them by giving them additional skills. So we would spend a significant amount of time and effort to train our staff, to encourage them to work with other experts within the industry. So they spend time working outside the dealing with organisations outside the Bracknell Forest Council. And in terms of the consultancy, we would ideally not use very much consultancy because it's very expensive, and particularly when we've invested in our own team, we would want to encourage our own team and train those staff up. We are potentially looking at some consultancy in relation to our Scope 3 measurement, so our Scope 3 emissions, which are effectively our downstream emissions, which are made up of organisations which we would employ, their emissions, for example. They're very notoriously difficult to measure, and there are a number of different ways that we can measure our Scope 3 emissions, and that's something that we might look at having some consultancy providers with some help on. But we will have hopefully a cabinet report coming through in the next couple of months on that. So, okay.
Councillor Eggleston, then Barnard.
Thank you for the presentation, which was excellent. Just a couple of quick questions. On page 223, where it says you're going to offer staff a free bus travel to work taster day, and that'd be 2,000, is that at the new rate of bus fare? Or was that worked out at the old rate, which went up on January the 1st? Thank you.
So that's a proposal, as opposed to that's definitely going to happen. So there are a range of proposals in the strategy, and we need to obviously work out which ones we're going to deliver, depending on the budget approval that goes forward. But yes, it would be, if we were to do that, it would be on the new rates.
Thank you. And I've just got a second question. When we're sort of talking about making everything much better in the borough, of course, the main thing is housing. How is the Cabinet Member for Housing working very closely with ABRI to actually bring their homes up to standard to sort of cover this? Because we know a lot of the houses, particularly sort of Priestwood, Bulbrook side, were built in the 1950s and cannot retain the heat. And that is something we know ABRI have done surveys but have done nothing about it. And of course that would then automatically bring, you know, make it more cost effective for our residents, whether they, and also people who aren't with ABRI but own their own homes that are older. Have we got schemes in place for them as well, for our residents who would like to join in, and to make sure that they're not wasting energy? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, part of the sector, there is a sector which is housing sector. And ABRI are an important part of that, but there are, I think there's 5 different housing associations and now all come to meetings and talk about what they're going to do about retrofitting. A lot of the retrofitting will depend on government grants, which are still being pushed through. ABRI actually are one of the main people to talk to Parliament about, with all the ministers about Gavin, or I think his name is about, as they go up and they meet about retrofitting and all this sort of stuff. So there is a plan to retrofit the oldest houses, and we've got a fantastic gadget now which can actually work with them and tell them which are the houses that have to be done first, thanks to SSEN. And you can use an app and you can see which house is losing most and which should have solar panels and which should have this and all the rest of it. So working together and this sector, and I attend most of those sectors, those 10 meetings, I attend as many of them as I can. And they also come to the JCAB to say what they've been doing. So retrofitting is a really big part of, and making sure that we get over fuel poverty, really, because that is one way in which investment like this can actually help everybody with the cost of fuel. As far as private people are concerned, that's why we want really more or less like solar together. We want to look for across the southeast of England, and that's why the Prosperity Board would be good, and Berkshire, because if we could get a reputable company to start looking and telling us what retrofitting would look like. I live in a house, one of the posh Waits house, which has double walls underneath, but upstairs it's just breeze blocked with cladding on the outside. They're terrible. And that's all those houses all the way over that side of Bracknell. So we need to start looking at how we can do insulation on the outside of those houses with companies that can come in and we can trust them, and like Solar Together, we then can invite people to invest in this, but knowing that they're going to get a good job for the money that they're using. So this is all in the plans, but it's not taken off yet, or not even really started, but it's why we need a lot more workforce really to help it.
Thank you. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you. Can I just say this is a really exciting strategy, and a huge amount of work's been put into it. But inevitably its success will be how it lands with our residents. So we talk about progress and success criteria. How are we going to survey our residents? One, to see if we've connected with this strategy with them in terms, because there's so much going on in this area. How are we going to sort of survey our residents to understand how we're doing? Because we're going to clearly see a level of engagement in those early stages before we see a significant reduction in emissions. And you know, we talked about consultants earlier, but are we actually going to commission someone to find out what that looks like? Because, you know, it's a great strategy. Everybody's absolutely bought into it because it's the right thing to do, but we need to know how it lands. And secondly, given the conversation that we had earlier about the council's financial position going forward, how are we going to manage the pressure and tensions in future years to make sure that investment is maintained in this? Because, of course, the worst thing is that we start all this good work now, but for reasons beyond our direct control, it becomes harder and harder to sustain, when actually the decision is, do we support this or do we have to support social care or something like that? Because it is a fairly ambitious, significant investment, and we want to, as has been said earlier, to make sure we hold on to you know, good people that we get on board to deliver this. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
As far as involvement and finding out where we're hitting, we're already doing that already. We're not just doing a budget consultation. I've been out in a climate change consultation. We've got one tomorrow even in there where we play with the game and then they come in and they do recycling. But as part of that, once you get the parent, you start talking. We're also wanting to have a zero hub, which is in the library, and we've talked to the librarians about this. And when you have a zero hub and you have people coming in and you have somewhere in the centre of town with some publicity, there'll also be questionnaires go out from time to time to see how people feel about that. A lot of it is there's Nesta investing with us. Nesta are having 10 different sessions in the next 2 weeks, in the next 4 weeks, where they take and they're inviting different people from different areas of Bracknell Forest to come forward and say what climate change means for them. Both their main two topics are energy and food, and then seeing what they can do and getting it. And this is free for us. And in the future, we're really wanting to have a green economy. We're really wanting to get partnerships set up with Bracknell Forest so that there is a lot of this can actually be sustainable because we've got partners supporting us really, beside everything being done by the council, because the bid and the rest are doing fantastic stuff as well, and we can build on that. But we realise that there has to be an initial investment to save, if you like, but there needs to be an investment to get this going.
I've got a related question. You referenced a session you had in Crowthorne this week, and it leads me to think, really applaud the work that's been doing, and it is so important, and we see how important it is, and we can see what you set out. But it is equally important that all our residents take it as seriously, and we go on this journey together, because that's the only way we're going to achieve the objectives you want to achieve. With all the other immediate pressures that are on people's lives, you ask people what's important to them, and it's access to GPs and the cost of living and, everything that is keeping people up at night. Do you feel this comes quite far down their list of worries? And if so, how do we communicate the real immediate importance of this for now and in the future?
So I think as far as it comes down, people need to talk about this, and that's why we need all these volunteers out there doing it. And the more you talk to people, it isn't at the number one priority for some until you actually realise the benefits they will get out of it. We've had about fuel poverty tonight, talking about that. And if people had to have less money paid out by that because they've managed to get investment from ABRI or whatever other housing association into their homes to help them, they can see the point of it. When I tell them that we're wasting £1 million a year because we're not recycling properly and we're paying to get things in the landfill when it actually could be recycled, and that would be £1 million a year Bracknell Forest could spend on social services and the rest of it. So I mean, if people know the benefits of doing this, then I think they will buy in. When we look at our volunteers, and that's all I can ask you, each group, each sector has quite a lot of volunteers, and they're right across Bracknell. So for some of the people, this is their number one thing in their life. This is number one. And if we can bring the passion of all those people, which is now hundreds, then I think we're doing quite well, really, to make sure that they're going out and doing that in their workplace, and they're doing that in their mother and toddler clubs, and they're doing that outside the school gate. It's talking to people and making people realise that actually we have to do something.
Thank you. I'm going to go Councillor Webb and then back to Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed in recent news coverage that Reading and Oxford have introduced a ban on wood burners. Bearing in mind we're a rural community and obviously there's fuel poverty and people do rely on burners in those areas, are you considering looking at a ban on wood burners because of the emissions and particulates produced?
There always used to be a ban in Bracknell. We weren't allowed to burn anything. Once we had to, we didn't, and anyway, so we've not even thought about that yet. But I mean, it is something which is, there are certain stoves, which is the worst one. There are certain areas which are stoves which are safe. There's certain areas which aren't. I certainly think we've done a lot with bonfires and a lot with those open things on the allotments as well. There's a lot of work being done on that. Is there any discussion on that?
Thank you. Just through you, Chair. The Public Protection Partnership is responsible for enforcement around sort of heavy smoke or bonfires, antisocial behaviour, that kind of thing. And they have undertaken recently some work to publicise and engage with the public around the proper use of wood on fires, both open fires and also wood burners. So I think it's very clear in terms of the legislation what people are allowed to burn, and the Public Protection Partnership will engage with the public and ultimately enforce should that be needed. That's not a ban on fires, it's just about using the right fuel in those fires.
Thank you. Councillor Barnard, then McLean.
So I think going back to my question about engagement, so I get it, there are lots of volunteers and there are lots of enthusiasts, and there's a body of residents growing all the time who really get this and who will proactively respond. What I'm asking about is, how do we actually find out how this is landing with that significant silent majority of our residents? And that's not the only issue, there are others as well. Because what we actually need is some empirical, quasi-scientific data that says when we sort of randomly approach residents, not actually encourage them to talk to us about, climate change and other things, how this is landing and how this is working. Because I think going back to the priority question, what you get out of resident surveys, which are, conducted randomly to try and get across representatives, how this is landing with all parts of our community. Because this is a huge agenda, and it's for me, it's more than the enthusiasts. This is about how we reach out to and how we nuance our approach with those residents. And so I guess what I'm really saying is, as we come into a period of difficulty and concern more broadly, but climate change could be one, shouldn't we be looking at a resident survey to understand how this and others land? Because that will give us the empirical data, on a much broader thing. Because otherwise we will be talking and reassuring ourselves based on almost a self-selecting, enthusiastic group of residents. We really need to know how it's working elsewhere. Just on the log burner one, maybe Assistant Director of Contract Services, you can confirm, but I don't believe it's an outright ban. I think there is something actually about what you burn in the stove, whether it's seasoned versus unseasoned log, as someone that previously had a log burner, but won't be able to now. It's really important that we get that clear. So it's not about banning something, it's about actually people using a resource properly, which is seasoned dried timber, because it's wet timber that causes the problems, per se.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the report quite clearly states that we have an annual report going to Council in terms of the progress of the strategy and how we're performing as an organisation and wider across the borough. So I think that would be the opportunity to engage with residents to get their feedback at that stage, as it's going on an annual basis. So I think that is something that we can definitely look at in terms of collecting that feedback from through a survey or some workshops or some kind of engagement with residents to get their take on it. So yeah, I think if we could include that as part of our annual survey, it also produces evidence for full council as well to show how well we're engaging and developing our strategy. So thank you.
Can I just add as well, when the community climate change strategy gets launched in the summer, that would also be responsible for how all the community have to get involved. So that will have targets and monitoring. So that they'll have to work out. That's a different. That's the JCAB working on that as the community for outside, and that will also have to give some consultation to make sure how that's landing with everybody and how everybody's buying into that or not.
Okay, Councillor McLean for the last question.
Thank you. I understand that a contributory factor towards climate change is demolition of buildings, and clearly we're looking at the High Street car park and the future of that, and other parts of the borough have significant buildings that may be due to be demolished because it's cheaper to knock them down than repurpose them. I mean, how much of a factor is the use of unsuitable buildings and repurposing of buildings in the climate strategy to reduce carbon emissions?
It has to be a consideration on everything we do. The £4.4 million to take that car park down must surely be a lot of it is to get rid of the stuff that's already there and to make sure. So on planning and all the rest of it, it's all about carbon emissions, how much the material we're going to use, where we're going to put the stuff, how we're actually going to dispose of it, and how it's going to be pulled down. Would you want to add to that?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, the detail of the demolition of High Street car park, at the moment hasn't been released, but we want to work closely with our colleagues in property when the time comes to make sure that we can recycle whatever we can recycle from the site, and whatever's replacing the existing high street structure is done in as climate friendly a way as possible, both in terms of its building and also in terms of its long-term and ongoing maintenance. So yeah, thank you.
Can I also add that the joint venture that we work with, the Common Partnership, they have a superb sustainability policy that was one of the, and if you look at that and you see all the ways they work and all the ways in which they move things around and how they actually bring things on site and take them away and dispose of it, they are actually considering that in all the things that they work with, and they're working at the flats in Market Street.
Thank you very much. We'll close off the questions now and move to recommendations. Commissioners in the room will be invited to speak first. The mover of a recommendation can speak for 5 minutes. Everybody else can speak for up to 3 minutes and only speak once. If you wish to propose a recommendation to the Cabinet, we will keep note of it and vote on it as we have done before. Would anybody like to speak? Councillor Barnard.
I should be very brief, Chair.
Thank you.
I think, thank you, Councillor Klein. No, I think my recommendation would be that we explore the best mechanism possible to find how this is landing with our residents. And I'm no expert on what that would be, but I want to hear the voices of the harder to reach, aka those that don't proactively come forward. So my recommendation is, at the end of this year, let's evidence how it's landing, because that's how we can adapt our strategy and delivery plan to make sure we bring more people with us on what is an absolutely critical issue. And given we are investing both capital and resource into this, I think it's absolutely vital that we demonstrate to our residents that they are getting value for money, and furthermore how actually by their involvement can make it go further.
Councillor Eggleston.
Can I also add to that we don't have the survey when all the other surveys are going on? I think that's why there has been so many surveys that nobody is filling any of them in, and I think that could be adding to the drop on the overall budget as well, because if you have a look, there are about 4 running at the moment, which is just so we spread it out during the year for this one, please.
There's actually a point of information, which is if you do a resident survey, it reaches out to a cross-section, so it targets rather than reacts.
Yes, good point. Thank you, Councillor Eggleston. Councillor Barnard. Do we need to sort of clarify that, and then we can all vote on that, please?
So I think the recommendation was to explore the best mechanism to gain views of residents regarding climate change, especially those harder to reach people, and to ensure that not too many surveys are being undertaken at once to...
Yes, or it's deconflicted with... Yeah, Yes, I would support that. That's unanimous. So thank you for your presentation and again thorough answers to our questions. Leader, Councillor Mary Temperton, but also Assistant Director of Contract Services, Damien James, who we didn't introduce at the start. Thank you very much for your contribution. I can see as well. Yes, I've got a note. We didn't introduce the head of climate change and sustainable living, who is behind a lot of this work, Gareth Jones. Thank you. So you can leave us now. We welcome back. Okay, I think we will crack on with agenda item 8. In the interest of time, the work programme updates. So I'll ask the panel chairs to provide some verbal updates. I'll start with Councillor Eggleston on health.
Thank you. So at the moment, the health panel is awaiting the papers to start the mental health review of the review. As soon as we have it, we'll make a start on that. I just want to make a quick update regarding the, obviously, RBH. A decision is expected shortly on the rebuild of the Royal Berkshire Hospital, following a national review of the hospital rebuilding programme. A decision on setting up a joint health overview and scrutiny committee will be taken once the review confirms whether the hospital will be rebuilt and when. Officers are in discussion with other local authorities whose residents use RBH, and when contacted regarding a potential JHOS will inform the Commission members. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take updates from all the panel chairs and then we can come back with any questions if we have any. Councillor Forster, verbal update on housing.
So we have just done the scope creation meeting this afternoon, and the subject is Bracknell Forest Council delivering for social housing residents. We had a very good meeting, and we're just writing up the scope now, which we'll bring back for validation and sign off.
Look forward to it. Councillor Watts online, Chair of Education, Skills and Growth. I don't think you have an update, but in case you want to say anything.
No, nothing to update at this time, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for the panel chairs? No? Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Oh, yes. Councillor Barnard.
So I think it's hard to determine quite where the decision on the Royal Berkshire Hospital go, but what role will the panel have if the decision is taken not to rebuild it, in terms of actually understanding the impact on health provision to our residents in future years? I know it's a bit of a negative question, but you see what I mean. It's about the positive one. It's about services in the light of not a big rebuild.
Thank you for that. Well, at this moment in time, we don't know if they're going to do anything to it, to put it bluntly, or they could just rebuild where it is, or they could just locate. So, but there is supposed to be an update by this Friday. So ask me the next time and I might have a little bit more to add.
I promise I will, yes.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I don't think there's anything more to add on agenda item 8. I will just say one final point. So Victoria Stagement, the parent government representative, has given her resignation from the Overview and Scrutiny Commission and the Education, Skills and Growth panel. So I'm sure you'll join me in thanking her for her hard work and dedication to this role over recent months and years, I think. That only leaves me to say thank you for attending, and I now declare the meeting closed.